Hey everyone, today I wanted to talk about how we can add more detail to our objects. We've already talked about how we can select our objects and move, scale, or rotate them. So let's say move this up, scale this down, and I actually don't need to rotate it right now, so I'll leave it as is. We also talked about how we can select the different components that make up our objects, specifically vertices, edges, and polygons. So I'm going to actually grab this top polygon, kind of make it a little skinnier so that it will be a triangle. And you'll notice that this edge here, for example, is still just a straight line, right? I can't add any curvature to this because no matter how I move it, it's going to be the straight line, and it's just there as is. So in order to actually be able to define more detail along that line, I need to add points specifically throughout this section, right? So we're going to look at a couple of ways we can add points and edges, which will in turn create new polygons or smaller polygons. And the quickest and easiest way to do this is to actually hit the 3 key to go into polygon mode. And remember that selecting nothing on your object is the same as selecting everything. So right now everything is selected even though nothing is highlighted. And I'm going to use a hotkey of Shift and D. And that's going to bring up my Subdivide Polygons menu. Now just so you know, that option can also be found under Edit, Subdivide. There's a SDS Subdivide, and then the Shift D hotkey brings up the options for this entire tool. And here, if we compare this, you see the subdivide method is going to be faceted by default. You can change it to smooth or SDS subdivide or Catmull-Clark. We'll talk about some of these later on in the semester, but for now we're going to leave this as faceted and hit OK. And you'll see what it essentially did was it divided all of our polygons. The way it did this was it took like the basic polygon that we had, this one, and it took the middle of all the edges that made that polygon, and added a point there, and then it attached those points to the center. So just so you see this on another example, I'm going to go back to create. I'm going to throw in a, let's use a sphere. And I'm going to go to item mode, select it, and move it over. Now, if I go into polygon mode and press Shift D, oh, wrong key, sorry, Shift and D, and hit OK, you'll see that those polygons that were here are now 4, but the triangles that were here, if we undo Control Z, a couple of times. Yep. Let me do one more right there. So this triangle, when I hit subdivide with Shift D, again I'm going to deselect. Shift D, hit OK. It finds the center of each triangle and just cuts it in the edges, or cuts it by the edges that surround it. So let's actually just throw in another sphere here for comparison sake. Yeah. Like that. So this was the original triangle. Select this item first. The original triangle was that guy, and it took this edge, found the middle, this edge, found the middle, and that edge, found the middle, and then attach those to each other. Okay. So that's the quickest and easiest way to add geometry. However, it might be adding too much in some cases. But essentially what we can do now is, let's go back to this triangle example. We press Shift D, or sorry, go into polygon mode and hit Shift D. You'll see it will keep subdividing. And now we have all these edges here that we can use to define the shape of the side. So we can, let's say, go into our front view right here, and we can kind of grab these entire rows really and scale them out. or scale them in however we want to get a better curvature or interesting profile along the side of our object. Okay. That, however, does add all this other geometry that we're not really using here, right? Because if I'm not defining anything here, why do I need all this? So one thing I could definitely do is just select these using my selection tools from the last lesson, the L key to make loops, and just delete them. And maybe I don't need this detail either, or maybe I want less of it, so I can grab, let's say, every other loop, L, and delete them, and that way I still have this one and this one. We can kind of play around with it, see what we can get. Scale this out, and maybe scale this back in on the top. So grab that and scale it in. And I'm going to scale these guys in too a little bit. So edge mode, select those, scale them in, edge mode again, select those, and scale them in. Okay. Not trying to make anything specific here, but just giving you the understanding that when you have the more edges and vertices in your object, you can get more detail out of it, right? I couldn't make this shape out of just that cube as is, right? Of course, there is a way to create your geometry with additional detail to start off with. So if I open up a new scene here, throw in a cube, that's only going to have those 6 sides. But if I was to undo that and in my empty mesh item, draw in a cube without holding the shift key, this will let me interactively draw that. And if I go to my tool properties with the K key or that button down there, here I can remember I want to set my position to 0, 0, 0. I can actually set my size to whatever I want. Just a note here, if I type in a number and then hit tab, it's going to assume that number is meters. If I wanted some like millimeters, I'd want to do let's say 200 millimeters would be 0.2, or I can type in 200 mm and hit tab. But by default, it will turn to meters. And honestly, the size of things don't matter as long as everything is proportionate in your scene. All right. But going back to some of the other options here, I do have the options for the number of segments in my X, Y, and Z axis. So if I start increasing this, I can start my object off with multiple edges and vertices on each side. So in our case, like in the Z direction, we didn't really need any detail. In the X direction here, we only needed the 3, and in the Y direction, we had a couple more just so we could define it. Now I'm just going to hit space to get out of that tool and go to item mode with the 5 key. Scale this flat, and now I can go back to where I was. So I can grab, let's say, these 4 polygons, shrink them down. You might see I'll need to do a little bit more work because I didn't define the shape a little bit earlier, but that's fine. You know, I can go in and kind of control this and get the same results. Oops. Grab this, hold that in. Pull this in, listen out a little, this one in a little bit more, this one out, and you know, just control whatever I need to with this shape, right? So that's like the roughest way to add geometry or add detail. We're going to look at a couple of other tools that will help us add detail more like specifically. So I'm going to throw in another cube here, and I'm going to start off with some of my edge tools. So down in this section here, you have the edge panel, and here we have 2 of my favorite tools for adding geometry, the add loop and the add vertex tool. The add loop is going to essentially highlight in blue kind of a loop in your geometry that it can add a parallel line on. You'll also notice this window still popping up because when I had my last tool on, I hit K and I had pinned it. So if this doesn't pop up for you, just hit the K key and that should pop up. But we're not going to rely on this too much for these two tools. But if I was to just go back in here and highlight something and click, you're going to see if I hold down my mouse, click and drag, it's going to give me a percentage of where to add this new edge. And you'll see it kind of works its way all the way around. So if I let go of the tool and I hit Alt and click to rotate, you can see where that edge is. Now, the tool is still active, so if I click again, it's just going to add that edge, right? The tool will stay active until I hit the spacebar to get out of it. Now that I hit the spacebar, that edge is there. And you know, if it's not in the right place, I can just select it, delete it, and try again. In this case, the object is simple enough where if I hit space to get out of that, I can still just select the object or the edge, loop, and move that wherever I needed it to be. But, you know, that's depending on however you want to work, and that's fine. So here, let's say I wanted to add one over here. Now, let's say I want to add a few across the top here. I can add the first one, but if I click again, it's just going to move, right? So if I want to essentially use the tool multiple times, I can hold down the shift key and my second click will essentially drop the tool and pick it back up for another use. So if I hold down the shift key and click, it's going to leave that first edge and then let me use the tool again, continue to hold it down and click multiple times to keep adding edges. And they don't even have to be along this edge. You'll see like now the highlights are showing those loops a little bit better. But I can go along this edge here, and I can add one here, and I can add one more in the top, or another in the top. And that's really an efficient way to get geometry all the way around your object starting out, and also lets you specify where you want that geometry. Okay. Similar to that tool, we have the Add Vertex tool. However, there is a slight problem with this. So the Add Vertex tool just adds a point, right? If I click here and then I shift click here, it's not going to add an edge, but it is going to create that point, which again, by default, we can't see. So I'm just going to hit the space bar, hit the O key, and go to Active Meshes and change Show Vertices to Always. And I'm going to turn on Independent Point Size just so it's a little bit easier to see on the video. And you'll see it created those 2 points there. That might be a bit much. All right. So now I have these points and I can definitely move and like rotate them. Well, points can't really rotate, but I can move them around for sure. And you'll notice like that's fine and all, but this kind of brings up an interesting problem in 3D. So I'm going to show you that in just another object. So let's throw in a plane object here. We're going to go to item mode and move it up. And we have this flat object that's just facing the top of our scene. And if we go back to the edge tools and go to add vertex, and I add a point right there. Now if I grab this point, and I was to, let's say, move it up, we're gonna get some weird artifacting or just weird behavior in our scene, because right now the computer doesn't really know what this shape looks like, right? It knows where these points are, and it knows that it's all connected, but it can't really interpret like any smooth surfaces. It's just assuming like there's a straight line from here to here, from here to here, here to here, there to there, you know, and it doesn't really know that, hey, is there a straight line going from this point to this point, or is there a straight line going from here to here, or is there a straight line going from here to here, right? There's no way for us to tell it that without drawing in an edge. So one of the things I can do really quickly is at least add in the other points that I need, let's say here, and then I can try to draw in another edge from here to here to define that shape. So that's what we'll look at next, and that will kind of show you in a little bit better what it means when it can't like figure out the shape of the object. So I'm going to hit spacebar to leave that point in, and we're going to look at some other tools to add geometry. Okay, so we're gonna now head over to the edit tab here, and we're gonna look at these slice tools up here. We're not gonna worry too much about the axis slice because they're a little finicky and they're not the most useful when you're just starting out. So we're gonna walk through some of these. The first one we're gonna actually look at is going to be the edge slice here. And edge slice is going to let me click and drag on an edge. So you see if I go near an edge, it's going to highlight it. I'm going to actually hide the cube just so it's out of our way. And when I click on the edge, it's going to give me a number percentage on as to how far on that edge I am from the points on either side. So if I actually move that over to like 0 or 100%, it's going to start my edge at that point. And then from this point, I can click on another edge like that. And if I click up there and drag it, it's going to connect it to that point. And now if I hit space, this is more of a shape that Modo can interpret. It kind of knows that it's a flat plane. However, even here, it's a little confusing, right? Like, it's not going to interpret a curvature between like this surface and this surface. It's still assuming this is kind of flat. So we might want to go in and add another edge from this point to this point. So let's give that a try with the same tool. I'm going to go edge slice, click and drag on this edge, click and drag on that edge, and now you can see it like shades a little bit better, right? A couple of other things. So I've made a point here and I connected it here. I can just continue my adding of edges. So if I just like clicked here, I'm not holding on the shift key. If I click here, it's going to continue. And then if I was to click here, it will just kind of let me continue growing that edge from wherever I was. All right. You can see it's having a little trouble here, so I'm going to actually undo that, Control Z. The tool's still active, I haven't hit the space bar. I'm going to click on this edge and try to pull down here. And you can see it's still having a little bit of issue over there. So I'm going to undo just to that point. I'm going to hit spacebar to get out of the tool. I'm just going to look at my vertices here. So what I'm doing is I went into vertex mode and I'm right clicking and dragging to select these. And I'm looking down here to make sure that it's not 2 points at the same location. It's just one vertex. This section down here does give you like your detail about your selection. So how many polygons I have selected, how many edges I have selected, and how many, like if I click on nothing, you'll see it's like all the edges or all the vertices or all the polygons. So another indicator that selecting nothing is like selecting everything. Let's try that one more time. We're going to click here. I'm going to click a point down here. And I'm going to click here. And you see it's just a little happier this time around. I think it was just continuing that line all the way around gave it some wonkiness. But let's say we're happy with this. We can hit space. Now, like I said earlier, we can, in fact, add or use this tool multiple times as well. So let's go back to it one more time. We're going to go to kind of exactly 50%. I'm just going to kind of move my mouse till I'm there, 50%. And I'm going to go to this edge at, let's say, 20%. All right. Now let's say I want to do the same thing on this side. If I was to click here, it's just going to kind of act up a little bit. So instead what I want to do is hold down shift, which will like clearly define that I'm dropping the tool and starting over. And I'm going to move to 50%, and then here I'm going to go back to, and you'll notice this is the other way around. So I think I was at what, 12%, so 100 minus 12, 88. Probably less than that. I don't remember. So I mean, I'm just gonna eyeball it. It's not super important. And let's say there. Okay. So that's how we can quickly add in just edges. Now, just one thing to note about this shape right now is you'll notice that it started with like a flat plane, and the other side of it has no shading detail. And so if I was to actually produce a final image from this and I was looking through here, you would see nothing. You would see objects that are behind it without any issue. So keep that in mind, like the inside of these objects by default don't have any shading or color, um, and the bottom of the plane object by default has no shading or color. Okay, let's throw in well, actually, let's go to a new scene, and we will throw in a cube. Now, I can always go back to create to throw in another shape. One of the things that I've made a habit of doing is pressing the F2 key, um, and that just kind of brings up a floating version of the same panel. So, and by default, that panel will start on the basic tools. So if I wanted to have multiple toolbars like that, I can, but it only works up to 2 toolbars, so you can't have multiple just across your screen or anything. So if you ever see me do that, that's just the F2 key on the keyboard. I'm gonna hit Shift and click on a cube, Shift and A to frame it up. And I'm going to close this panel now and just go to my Polygon Slice tool. The Polygon Slice tool is kind of straightforward. It's going to draw a edge through your scene, or a plane through your scene rather, that's going to cut any surface that it interacts with. So to use this, I'm going to click and then drag, and it's going to give me these 2 points, and I can adjust these 2 points in 3D space however I need. And you'll notice that wherever this purple grid that's being drawn intersects with my object, it's going to add an edge and all the corresponding vertices. If I also just put this object in the middle, like here, you'll notice it's only going to create an edge till that point. But this is a good way to kind of just trim your object. So we can kind of cut it that way, hit space, and now we have this entire edge loop, right? In comparison, the other add loop tool here would not draw it on that angle. You know, even now it doesn't try to like highlight those as a loop really. So if you needed to work on an angle like that, that's a good tool for that. The next one that we're going to look at, I'm just going to delete this entire loop, is the curve slice, and that's pretty similar, except this time it's going to let me click and drag to draw a shape, or curve rather, and that curve, wherever it intersects with my scene or with my selected object, will cut into that object. So let's actually just talk about these curves really quickly. You'll notice there's a cyan square every place I clicked, and I can select those and kind of adjust them. Now, I can also select those and delete them. Oh, maybe not. Let's try that again. I'm going to delete this, go back to my curve tool. I'm going to add a couple of points here, like that. Alright, so I can't delete them, sorry. But what I can do is add another point. So if I was to click right now, it's going to add it from the yellow point. So it's going to add a point after that. And I can go back if I wanted to and down. However, if I wanted to add a point, let's say between here and here, all I have to do is select the earlier point, and then my next click will add a point between those two. Okay, so if I wanted to add a point between this point and this point, click on the earlier one. Whoops, I added a new one, so Control Z. Select the earlier one, and then click, and it's going to let you have a little bit more control. And then when I hit space, it's going to get me out of that tool. And now I have all these edges that would have been a little bit harder to make otherwise. And I can edit those however I need to. All right, I'm going to delete these guys one more time. And let's look at the pen slice tool. So the pen slice tool here is kind of the same as the curve slice tool. However, it's going to give you straight edges between each of your points. Right, so if I wanted to, let's say, do like let's undo a little bit. I'm going to look at this from my front view. I'm going to do like a star shape cutout, so I can click here, there, up there, down to there, over, down, right. might not give me a clean cut. There we go. That. And if I want to grab that polygon, you'll notice it actually didn't cut all the way through. Sometimes that will happen. It should be cutting all the way through, but in this case it didn't. So it is kind of what it is. I will try to do it one more time. Let's actually start from outside the object. So pen slice, we're going to click here, go to there, up, down, and outside, then here, out here, up there, out here, over there, and yeah, this time it did draw all the way through the object, and yeah, we have this little star shape, wonky, very wonky star shape. Alright, we'll come back to what we can do with some of these later on, but let's look at the loop slice tool for now. I'm gonna, again, new scene, F2, and throw in a cylinder, because that's the best example I can give you for this. The loop slice will essentially try to find any kind of loops the same way that the add loop will, where it highlights whatever is kind of parallel. And we will use the loop slice here by selecting an edge first. So you have to select an edge, and then you go to loop slice, and you'll see by default it just kind of gives me this one slice, and I can click and drag. I can also use this little widget up here to click and drag, and it tells me what percentage it's on. But the power of the loop slice tool comes in its property panel, so I'm going to hit the K key to bring that up. And here you'll see I have a couple of options. Specifically, the count is how many loops I'm doing. And then I have a couple of options for the mode here. So it can be free, uniform, or symmetry. So by free, I can essentially grab any of these. Actually, let me hit the K key and just pin this so it stays up. I can grab any of these and slide them wherever I want. Let's say I need a lot of detail at the top and not much at the bottom. I can do something like that. I can go to mode and I can do uniform, in which case it will evenly distribute those edges based on the original edge that I had selected, and now you'll see all of these are kind of locked. And if I go to symmetry and then I try to move these, you'll notice the opposite end will move as well. The middle here will be locked if I have an odd number, and if I have an even number, those two will be movable as well for symmetry. Okay. So this tool is really cool to kind of get a lot of edges really quickly and get them kind of precisely where you need them. So if I needed one at exactly 50%, or let's say every 10%, I can go back to free, for example, and then move this over to 10%, move this one over to 20, move this one over to 30, this one over to 40, and I'm just going to actually stop them at 50, so I'm going to drop my count, and you'll see that we'll reset it, but that's okay. So 10, 20, 30, 40, and 50%. And then hit spacebar to get out of that tool, and now I know this is the center of my object, and then I can make whatever changes I needed to. If I was doing like the neck of a bottle or something, this might be very useful for me. Yep. And let's say I wanted to have a bit more detail here. So I can actually select a certain polygon instead of selecting all of them, and then hit Shift and D to bring up that subdivide panel, hit OK. And that's going to actually add a point right in the middle. But one of the parts I don't love about this is the edges here are kind of split. So it's not like an edge going from the existing points, it created new points. And of course there's a lot of things you can do. For example, we can quickly use our edge slice tool. Start there, go over to there, connect it there, shift click here to start another one, click up here to connect it, and just draw that in. We can also use some other tools that we'll talk about in a bit, but for now I'm just going to undo that entire process. All right. So yeah, you can use this to kind of build up, let's say, chess pieces or something pretty easily. Alright, so before we actually go on, I did want to mention a couple of other tools to get rid of geometry. So we did mention the easiest one is to just select your edges or vertices or polygons and delete them. When you delete polygons, just keep in mind that's going to make a hole, and that by default nothing on the inside of that hole has shading information, so it's going to be like an infinitely thin surface. And sometimes if you delete points, you might get a little bit of a weird result like that. So you might want to go into the vertex tools here and try to, instead of just deleting them, you can use the collapse, and that will give you a result where it kind of modifies the points around it. Or you can try to select it and hit remove. You see in this case it did the same as the deletion, and if that's not what you want, another thing you can do is kind of just move the edges from around it, and that's going to give us one polygon. You can also use the merge or weld tools. In this case you'd want to use the weld tool, which will let you grab a point, and you'll see as soon as I get near another point, it's going to kind of jump to that point, and it will combine those. So I can say click and drag that, click and drag that. Whoops, I grabbed the polygon, click and drag that. And now if I hit spacebar to get out of the tool and I select those points, you'll see each one of those is just one vertex. Okay. Just to show you that one more time, select that, click and drag it over. Oops. You want to be careful with how you select it, so make sure that it's blue, pull that over, and maybe we do that here too. Grab that, pull it over, grab that, pull it over, and now we kind of have this flat edge on the side of our cylinder. Okay. We have a slide tool here, and the slide tool is essentially going to let you move a point kind of along the surface that it's already laying on. So it will try to essentially preserve the shape of the overall object, but like help you fine tune where this is. You do want to be a little bit careful with it, but it's there if you need it. The same tool kind of exists in the vertex mode. In the edge mode rather. So if I was to grab this entire edge and I was to move it, you'll notice it's going to kind of destroy the shape of my outside, right? So go to my move tool, move it up or down, and it ruins that straight edge. However, if I go to the slide tool under my edge tools, this will move it along the existing kind of curvature of the side of that object. So if I need to fine tune where this edge is, it's kind of like letting me draw in a edge loop and then delete the original, but it lets me move things a little bit smoothly, a little bit smoother. So before we move on to a couple of the meteor tools, I did want to show you just another way to kind of deal with this top polygon. So in 3D in general, it doesn't really matter when you're starting out, but we want to have shapes that are made out of polygons that have 3 or 4 sides. And if we look at this top polygon here, it's flat, so we don't really have a issue. But if we look at our number of sides by just going to Alt 2, you see we have 24 edges. Now, you could try to just subdivide this, hit Shift and D with the polygon selected, and hit OK. And that's going to create a bunch of triangles, but they're not actually triangles because you'll see 1, 2, 3, 4 sides. And now these polygons down here will have 5 faces. So it's dividing that, it's causing a little bit of a messier geometry. So instead, what you could do First, we're just going to add a loop out here. And you'll notice, actually this is good, you'll notice it didn't create the loop. And that's because I have this polygon selected, so my tools are limited to that polygon. And since I'm working outside of that, it's not going to do anything for me. So I'm going to drop my selection, and then I'm going to go to add loop, and now add that in. And here, I'm going to grab these polygons on top, or sorry, rather, these vertices on top, and I'm going to merge them together. And to do that, I'm going to go to Vertex, and down here I have these two options for join and join average. So by default, join will join all your points to the last selected point. So if I deselect one and add it, join, hit OK, that's going to move all the points to that location. And it tells me 24 were joined. I'm going to undo that. If I do join average, it's going to join them all in the middle. And now if I go to my side view here, I notice that point is still a little bit higher, so I can just bring that down. Don't worry about snapping. I know I've had it turned on, but we'll look at those tools in a later lesson. But yeah, that's going to give me these nice triangles on the side and these nice four-sided polygons or quads on the edge here. Just so you know, Modo does have ways to kind of find different polygons, edges, and vertices with different properties. For example, if I was to bring this panel up here and go to stats, I have my object and I have polygons, edges, and vertices. If I click on polygons, I can see it by the number of vertices, and you'll see that down here the number of polygons with 3 vertices around it are 26, and if I hit this plus button, it's going to add it to my selection, and those are this 26 polygons or 24 polygons plus something else, right? So if I click outside to select nothing, click that, you'll notice it's showing these two have 3 edges, and you'll notice down here we have one that has more than 4 edges. So if we click that, it should be our bottom polygon right there. So here I'm going to do kind of the same thing. I'm going to just go to select nothing, go to my add loop tool, add a loop down here really quickly, and then I'm going to select that polygon, Alt and 1 to select the vertices around it, and under vertex tools, join average, 22 vertices joined, and I'm going to grab that and go to my side view and just move that up a little bit so it's kind of flat. And now you'll see I don't have any polygons that have more than 4 vertices. Right? I can select all my quads by selecting the ones that have 4. I can select all my triangles by selecting the ones that have 3. However, you'll notice I click this and it just adds to our selection. So you want to like remove the 4 with the minus and then add the ones with the 3 vertices with the plus. You can do the same thing for edges. So edges by how many polygons they're joining. No edge in your scene should actually be joining more than 2. So that should select every edge. Let me deselect that. If we look at vertices, however, we can look at vertices by edge, and we'll see that 4 of them have, 158 of them have 4 edges going into them. So for example, this vertex has 1, 2, 3, 4 going into it. If we look at more than 4, select those, we should see that one has more than 4, of course. This one has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The one on the bottom has 22, I believe it was. This one has 5 also. And this one oddly got selected. And I'm kind of curious about why that is. So I'm going to just deselect. Select that again. Yep, I think I just had it selected from earlier. Yeah. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. So it's another way to kind of look for parts of your geometry that might not be exactly what you expect them to be. most of the tools that we use are kind of built from the ground up to preserve or limit rather your geometry to keeping triangles or quads, right? All right, so let's get to the crux of this lesson. I want to show you a couple of tools that are pretty much essential to 3D modeling in these techniques. I'm gonna do this in a new scene here. So Control W and don't save. I'm gonna go back to my properties panel, full screen this guy. You'll see I'm in my camera. Just gonna go back to perspective and kind of make sure I'm oriented correctly, like that. Alright, let's start with a couple of cubes. We're gonna put one in, select it, hit 5, select it in item mode, Control D to move this over, Control D one more time, move that over, and we're gonna look at some of these tools in the terms of vertices, edges, and polygons, because it's the same tool but it has a little bit of a different functionality depending on what component you have selected. So the first one we're going to look at is called the extrude tool. Now the extrude tool can be found in the vertex panel, extrude, the edge panel, extrude, and of course the polygon panel, extrude, right? So what the extrude tool will do is essentially pull a part of your geometry out and add another level of detail on top of it. So if I am going to select, let's say, this vertex here, and I go to my extrude tool, you'll notice I clicked it in the polygon menu, but if I click it, it's going to kind of give me this point, and it's not going to do anything. So let's undo that. Let's go back to the vertex tools, and I'm going to click extrude, and now I have this handlebar with the blue handle and the red handle. Now that's what we want to see here. I'm going to press the K key to bring up the tool properties. I'm going to pin that open so it stays there. Alright, so the first handlebar here, the blue, is our extrude distance, and the red handle here is our width, and you'll see that's essentially making a point out of the original point. So it's really pulling that original point out, and then it is going to kind of create a new edge around the geometry that it made. You know, you can do this interactively here. You can even go into the object if you wanted to, and then you can narrow the surrounding around it, right? You can actually kind of get a flat shape if you just carefully look at what you're doing here, and that's like cutting that corner off. Now let's look at an edge extrude. So I'm going to go to my second item, grab this edge, go to my edge tools, and extrude, and you'll see I get the same kind of tools. However, this time it's going to pull that edge in and out, and it's going to let me split my edge that way. So this is one of those tools where while it's useful, actually in both these cases, you'll notice that the polygon, let's play around with this a little bit more, let's push this up here. You'll notice that these polygons have more than 4 sides, so just keep that in mind. You might want to go in and clean that up with like the edge tool, depending on if that polygon is staying flat or not. The edge slice tool rather. But actually, let's go back to this object and we'll undo a couple of the changes here. Okay, so I'm going to grab that edge and I'm going to do another extrude on it, and I'm going to give it a good width. Now this is something you want to be careful about. If I was to push this edge in, that's kind of fine. However, Modo might have some issues with the vertex that's right there and right there, because that vertice is directly in the same location as the rest of this polygon. So you might see a little bit of weird behavior, in which case, you know, after you're happy with however this extrude is, what you would want to do is, just to be careful, go and select that edge and scale it down so that those 2 points on the side aren't absolutely in that exact location, um, but that will kind of give you a more predictable result. Okay. And then in this case, we're going to do a extrude on a polygon. So select this top polygon. We're going to go to Polygon Tools and Extrude, and we're going to click, and you'll see this just gives me a move tool now, right? So if I click and drag on this, it's essentially pulling that polygon up, but leaving the original edge. So it's kind of like duplicating that polygon and adding a ring around it is another way of thinking about it. I can scale this and move it, and it's just going to kind of essentially make this ring for you. All right. If we try that again really quick, we should see this sides value, and that's going to let me add even more subdivisions along it, and you'll see that they'll be evenly distributed depending on how much I move my tool during extrusion. And this is kind of interesting because I can say like I want to go on an angle and have subdivisions, right? Or more sides along that angle. Okay, so that is the extrude tool. And later on, when we talk about putting 3D text into our scene, the extrude tool is kind of useful because it will give you a back to a flat surface. I can actually show you that right now. So I'm going to go to my empty mesh item, and I'm going to use this pen tool right here. The pen tool essentially lets me draw out a polygon, right? But it's always going to be flat. So, if I try to click somewhere else, it's just going to add another point. If I select one of these points, like the curve tool, it's going to add a point between there and the next point. But it will always kind of give me this flat shape, even when I have more points. It's trying to keep everything flat. There's nothing connecting these points right now. So keep that in mind. But if I have this flat polygon selected, and I just select the polygon, and I go to extrude, click. So let me just point that out again. Selecting the polygon, clicking on my tool, and clicking inside of this work plane, or this view, is what's going to activate the tool. So I'm going to click and drag, and you see it keeps my previous value of 3 sides, and I'm just going to drop that down to 1 because I don't need it. But you'll see by default, the extrude tool will leave or create that back side, which this object didn't have when it was flat, right? It's just one side with shading information. Select it, extrude it, and now we have the other side, right? So if you do want to use the pen tool, or you want to like trace an image, you can definitely start out with that. I've seen a lot of people do like a guitar and trace out the body of the guitar, extrude it up, and you have a good starting point. So that is an option. Before we go and look at the bevel tool, which also applies to vertices, edges, and polygons, I do want to just mention some other polygon tools here. For example, we have spike. So spike will pretty much take a polygon and find its center. And you remember how when we hit Shift and D, it subdivides from the middle of the edges here? The spike tool will subdivide connecting to the vertices. So if I just click, it's going to give me that center point connected to the vertices, which is really nice. And then if I click and drag, it's going to either move that point in or out. Okay, so if you wanted to, let's say, make a kind of spiky ball, we can grab a sphere. Go item mode. Let's move this up. We will grab all the polygons on the sides. So let's do this. Loop, shift, click and drag, loop. I'm just gonna do that for those middle 3, and then I'm gonna shift and up to grow my selection. I think I have one more on the top than the bottom, so let's add that. Okay, so with these polygons selected, if I click spiky and click, first it's going to just subdivide all those, but if I click and drag, it's going to add a bunch of spikes, which can result in some pretty cool looking things. The spiky tool can also, you know, what we were doing with the cylinder before, it can kind of do that. So if we were to select that top polygon, hit spike and click, it's going to add that 1 point, and now we have a bunch of triangles instead of this 24-sided polygon. Right. But I digress. Let's get back to some of our other tools here. So I'm just going to delete some of these. You know, as a matter of fact, I'm just going to new scene. So new cube, Control D to duplicate it, Control D to duplicate it one more time, and let's look at our bevel tool. We'll go back to vertices for now. We'll grab this vertex right here, and we're going to do a bevel. And you'll see in this case I only have the one handlebar, and it's essentially cutting that corner with the straight pane. However, the tool properties for this does have a rounding option, and that's going to subdivide it more to kind of get a nice and smooth corner. Alright, you can see I can get it pretty smooth, but just keep in mind that if I was to leave this as is, let's say hit space to get out of that tool, select this polygon, and then convert my selection to edges, you'll notice there are 38 edges on this from here all the way to here, plus the original 4, right? So just keep in mind that that could produce some issues. You can even see it a little bit on my video where there's a little shading kind of artifact going through this polygon, where it just doesn't know for sure that it's a flat surface. Most simple shapes will be fine, but just keep that in mind. Right, you can see it on the front too there. In this object, we're going to do an edge bevel, so I'm going to grab that, go to my edge tools, and hit the bevel key. By the way, the bevel tool is so common that it's just attached to the B key, so you can just tap B to activate it in any of the 3 modes. So if I was to undo that to get out of the tool, select this edge and hit B, it's going to bring up the bevel tool. Alright, so here the blue value is my inset value, the distance of the inset, and the red is going to give me another border around it. So I can kind of just do the same thing as the corner where it's like cutting off that flat edge. And then I have the options over here for like a sharp corner, which kind of inverts or undoes anything we just did. We can kind of play around with these, but they don't really tend to do much. The round level here will, of course, give you a rounder edge, so that could be useful. The kind of value here will make it kind of a wider curve along the edge. So it's kind of a good way if you want to just do an entire edge and smooth it out. But it's not great if you wanted to do like every edge on the cube. So for example, if I was to grab all of these and hit the B key, it's gonna give me an okay result, but I feel like it's still more detail than I'll probably need. So I can play around with the roundness level and get something like that pretty quickly. Alright, these edges here, not at all essential. They're not really changing the shape of my object, so I'm gonna ditch them. And there we go. Okay. Alright, now on this guy we're going to use a polygon bevel. Now when I'm doing modeling examples, polygon bevels are going to probably get me like 90% of the way there. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to grab this polygon and that polygon, and I'm going to bevel them at the same time with the B key. So the red handle here is going to define kind of the edge or the inset around the original polygon, and the blue handle is going to say, does that polygon go in or out of my surface? Okay, so let's say I wanted to kind of just go in a little. I can drop that tool, press the B key again, crash Modo. So let me start this over. Give me a sec. Okay, so we're back. You'll notice that Modo crashed on me, and that's totally fine. You know, it's gonna happen often. Right now, we're just making scenes that we don't necessarily need to save, so you shouldn't be too worried about that. Um, you'll notice that when I reopen Modo, it says reload autosaves, and it says it appears that the application didn't cleanly exit from its last run. Try to reload the most recent autosave from the last scene. If you hit yes, you might get some of your work back. In this case, I got everything except for the bevels on this guy and the final bevels on this one. But you know, if you need it, it's there. But honestly, when we start working on our projects, I'm going to show you an efficient way to save, and we'll be good. I'm just going to clean up my UI because of some stuff that I was doing here. So you'll notice the UI also reset to whatever I had. So I had like this menu open like that. I'm in the Fusion section down here. So we don't need that for now. All right, we're going to throw in a cube, and we're just going to look at our polygon bevel tool. So I'm going to select these guys here. Let's select those two again. Polygon, bevel, and hit the K key to bring up my properties. And you'll notice the red handlebar here. Whoops, let's lock that open. Okay. So the red handlebar is going to be my inset value. Again, I can click and drag here. The blue handlebar is going to be my shift value, which will go in and out of the surface, right? So I'm gonna, let's make this a little bit wider, and I'm gonna reset my shift to 0 by just typing it in there. And I'm gonna hit spacebar to get out of that tool. And I'm gonna hit the B key to activate it one more time. I'm gonna do another bevel or another inset like that. And I'm gonna push it in this time. Okay. So that's gonna give me that shape. I'm gonna hit space. Now, before I continue, I'm just gonna bevel the top here. So I'm gonna select that, hit the B key, and pull this up just so you can look at some of the other menu options here. So I do have segments, which is similar to the extrude tool. It's going to give you more detail along that edge. And that's kind of the only one that you need to be super concerned with here. It's there if you need the edges. The other thing that's really cool about this is there is the option for a group polygons on your bevel. So let's say I was to bevel these 3 polygons, right? And I hit the B key, and I shrink that down, and I don't need these segments right now, so I'm going to turn that back to 1. It's going to essentially do all 3 of those polygons as separate bevels. However, if I turn on group polygons, it's going to do all of those 3 polygons as one bevel. So now I can kind of shrink that and push it in. And you can see it's kind of an interesting shape, right? So I can get that. Let me do that one more time so you can see it. So new cube, item mode, move it over. We're gonna grab these 3 polygons and use our bevel tool. Shrink down our inset. And I'm actually not gonna do a shift, I'm just gonna hit spacebar. Then I'm gonna hit the B key again. Whoops. B key, not the M key. And this time I'm going to actually just do a shift instead of a inset. And now it looks like I have a cube inside of a cube that's kind of been cut open, but that's all one piece of one mesh, right? And all of these shapes here are actually going to be quads, 4-sided, right? So kind of neat. And again, just to go over that, what I did there, you can do it on this side. We grab 3 polygons, hit the B key, and we inset them like that. And then I dropped the tool, but you can also, like we talked about with edge slice, we can hold shift and click to reactivate the tool. And you can kind of see it moved very slightly. And on the second activation of the tool, I'm just going to do the shift, hit spacebar to get out of it, and I have that, right? So I can use the bevel tool to kind of make quick changes to my object. I'm gonna move this one back here and work with this guy. So we grab this one and this one, hit the B key, and you'll notice that here I still have group polygons on, but since those polygons aren't touching each other, it's not going to count it as like a group. It's not going to do anything really differently just because that checkbox is on. Okay, so I'm gonna inset that and click and pull that in. And honestly, if I was to, let's say, shrink this down and maybe scale it a little bit this way, like there's a picture frame, right? Pretty simple. If I was to do that from scratch, cube, move this over, let's scale it to be kind of narrow and long, like that. Grab that, just the front polygon, bevel it once, shift click, and push it in, and there you go, picture frame. Right? Or, maybe it's a door or a closet, and I need to add shelves or something, so it can get you pretty far. Right. Okay, so I'm going to create a new scene one more time, and I'm going to throw in, let's do a cube and a sphere for now. I'm going to move this over. First tool I want to talk about is the thicken tool. So if I select a couple of these polygons here and delete them on the sphere, as I mentioned earlier, the edge of this is infinitely thin and there's no shading information on the inside. We can actually change that with the thicken tool, which is under the polygon menu here. So if I click on this tool, click in my viewport to activate it, it's going to give me handlebars that look similar to the bevel handlebars, and there's a very slight difference between what these two handlebars do, and it's basically how the program will calculate how to thicken the object. One is essentially doing a scale, right, just like your scale tool would, and the other is actually saying it's doing what's called it's an offset in this menu, but it's like a push operation where it's kind of picking every direction that each polygon faces and saying move this polygon in that direction. In the case of the sphere, it's kind of the same thing, but when we're working on more like complex shapes, you might need to play around with which one you use. But you can see if I just drop that tool, now I have an inside surface and I have an outside surface. You'll notice that, depending on my geometry and my scale, it might be a little bit difficult to move the camera in like I just did. So just keep that in mind. And also that when you're selecting stuff from here, you want to just double check that you haven't selected anything on the outside, depending on which display mode you're in. Okay. But yeah, once you have that done, you can kind of use your own selection tools, just how we were using, and yeah, you should be able to do whatever you need. Okay. So that's our thicken tool. The next thing I want to show you is our bridge operator. So the bridge operator here is essentially going to create a bridge or tunnel between parts of your object. So if I was to, let's say, bevel this guy in, and then with those same polygons selected, I go to polygon bridge and click in my viewport, it's going to essentially connect those two polygons and create like a little tunnel through my object. In the options for this, we have segments, which is how many divisions are across the inside here. And then we have twists. So right now, the program did a good job of saying this edge is going to that edge. But if I turn on my twist, let's say to 1, now the bottom edge is going to that side edge. If I set this to 2, the bottom edge is going to my top edge, but the object's kind of collapsing in and on itself. So I'm going to actually just see if I can increase my segments till I probably can't get there. If I go down to 1, you'll see like it gives you a nice smooth transition when you have a lot of segments. But I've honestly never modeled and had to use this twist, but I do see that you could kind of get interesting shapes out of it. All right, I'm gonna set my segments back to 0 and my twist back to 1. Now, the common question is like, how do I bridge these two objects together? And you have to take a few steps before you can do that. So by default, a bridge can only happen within one mesh item, and this object is in this mesh item and this object is in another mesh item. So what you can actually do is select both of those and merge them, merge meshes, hit OK, and now I can select polygons here, and notice it doesn't have to just be one. It should have the same number of outside edges, so in this case 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and I'm going to select 4 polygons here. I'm holding down shift, and I can do this only because we're in one mesh item, and this also will have 8 edges. Then I'm going to bridge, click, and it's going to draw this straight edge between them, right? Bridging those polygons together. You'll notice if I was to go to island select by double clicking on a polygon, it's going to select everything because they're actually joined. Okay, let me undo once and show you that one more time. So I have the selection made here. I'm going to click on bridge, and then the tool doesn't do anything until I activate it by clicking in this viewport. And here we might have a couple more uses for the twists and stuff, so let's add a couple of segments like that. And you'll notice right away this kind of curved up instead of being a straight line. And that's because the mode here is set to curve. If I set it back to linear, it's going to be a straight edge. If I set it to smooth, you might get a weird result. I've never gotten a great result out of the box with smooth, but curve will kind of give you this smooth interpolation between. You'll notice that some of these polygons are kind of facing upwards, whereas the polygons on the cube are kind of straight to the left. So it's kind of interpreting that starting direction and then coming down to flatten out. A couple of other notes here. Sometimes you'll see some weirdness where you're seeing the inside of the object. You might want to play around with flip polygons here to like turn that inside out. Remove polygon should be on by default, but it's going to basically delete the polygons that we started with. Reverse direction would just make it start calculating from this side to this side, but again, I'm getting weird results, so I might want to play around with that. And then here we might actually see some good use for the twists, right? So now that we have more than just 4 sides, this edge here used to connect over here. Now it's actually turning and connecting here. We twist a little bit more, a little bit more. We might need to add some segments to kind of give that a smooth look, but yeah, it's kind of interesting. I would say like when I see things like this, that's when I'm just like either try to change the mode to see if that gives you a better result, or really just reduce the twist back, right? And just note you can also twist to a negative number, so if you want to twist the other way, you could do that, right? So that's our bridge tool, our thicken tool, bevel, extrude, and honestly between those you could model quite a bit. And so I'm going to kind of stop there for today. Let me know if you have any questions or if you have any issues using these tools. You really want to kind of play around with them and start seeing how they work and get used to, like, you know, reaching the handles and making sure you have the right things selected before you activate one of the tools, things like that. Hey everyone, so one last thing before we cut this video off. I did want to give you an idea of where we're going with this for our first project, and it's a bit open-ended, but essentially you're going to want to make a scene with at least 5 different objects. The 5 objects should be made out of different materials, and we're going to look at some more modeling techniques and of course shading techniques and stuff as the weeks go on. But here are a couple of examples I did in previous classes. So the first one here is just a kind of bedside table. We have, you know, a picture frame. There's actually a glass there. it's invisible because there's a glass material on it. We have a book, we have a creepy hand, why not? And we have a lamp, we have a creepy clown picture. Sorry if that disturbs anybody. But we're gonna want to aim to create a scene like this that's fully colored, so don't worry about this UI at all, but just so you get an example, something like that. Actually, let me go back here and just hit the preview button, and that should be a little bit less intimidating. Yeah, so this, there's a light inside of our lamp. You can see you want to try to come up with items that are going to have, different materials specifically, like the glass, the wood, the paper, the cloth for the lamp, and the metal for the handle of the drawer, things like that. Let's look at some other examples here. So I have a shelf that I made. The shelf has a fan on it, another lamp, a globe, and a little snow globe here. And if we hit F9, hit play, this is going to show me kind of a colored version of this with like my materials and shading information. Again, don't be too concerned about this, but I'm just showing you this because this is what we're expecting for the first assignment. We will be talking about how to get your objects from these gray or simple colored shapes into more complex, realistic looking things like this. Okay, so we got a little globe. This could probably use some different colors on the base and the handle. We got this lamp with a kind of glass body and a metal pole going through it. The little snow globe here, and you can see this is taking a little bit longer to kind of calculate on my side or render, and that's fine. But we have a little snowman there with all the same detail from the one we made 2 lessons ago, but just shrunk down to fit inside. And then we have this fan, right? And I'll show you one more example, and sometime next week I will show you student examples as well. But here I have a little kind of locker built out, and there's a water bottle, there's a paper pad, like a post-it note here, and a postcard, books, binder. See if the textures still work on this one. Let me look at this. Nope. So I actually have, if I find the right version of this, we actually have like stuff written on the post-it note, picture on the postcard, kind of more reflections and stuff going on with the inside of the locker, paper, lines on the paper, textures on the books. Actually, we even have like the metal rings and everything here. So we'll be looking at how to put this shading information on our objects. But for now, actually, I think I even have the master lock like outside of this. Yep. Yeah. For now, you want to start thinking about what you want to model. The 5 objects, they should fit together in a scene somehow, even if it's kind of a silly way. Like there was no reason for me to have that hand inside the drawer. But think of what you want to do, and then start gathering pictures, right? Like if you want to have a lamp, don't just kind of invent the lamp from your head. Like either draw one out or find pictures of lamps that have interesting shapes, and try working on modeling those. Again, we will learn some more techniques along the way, but you can always redo your object and it will be faster, or you can always use the new techniques on top of what you already have. And keep in mind that the way we're handling, or rather the way that I'm handling this class, is you can submit the first assignment, we'll move on with the class. You can learn some technique that makes your modeling 80% better. You can go in and edit that first assignment, or redo it and resubmit it, and whatever is submitted by the last day of class is what your grade will be based on. So If you're not getting this super quickly, don't worry. Just keep some, keep a hand in the program. Try to put in a few minutes every day if you can, at least a few times every week, and yeah, we'll get you there. All right, that's all for this lesson. So as always, let me know if there's any questions in Discord. Okay, bye.